Hi everyone, my name is Kerr. I lost my father 5 years ago because of my mother. She did everything she could to get rid of him with my hands because she knew that his main weakness was me. You can't even imagine what it's like to become a tool in the relationship of two adults of your own people and ruin their marriage, knowing how much they love you. My mother never forgave my father for his infidelity and understood that he would not give her a divorce, much less give me to her. So she did the smartest thing, left home and then used me to punish my father. We were a normal family. I loved both my parents equally. They worked and fully provided for my life. I went to a good private school. At 16, I already had my own car. My father worked as a judge, and my mother ran her own business. She had a small boutique with fashionable women's rags. As you can imagine, the work of my father and mother was nervous, but my father was particularly tired. He often came home late, without mood, in his thoughts. I was usually asleep by the time he arrived. And then came a black streak in the family, and I began to wake up from parental quarrels. My mother traditionally greeted my father with shouts, even began to drink sometimes in the evenings. Their cursing grew louder and more aggressive, and I was unwittingly a witness to all this. They didn't know I was listening, and I didn't want to hear it myself. Mom accused Dad of cheating. She said she had proof. She found someone else's lipstick in Dad's car, and then read their correspondence on his phone while he was sleeping. The moment she told him this, I felt sick. I felt so bad that I doubled over. I could not believe that this was happening in my family, with my parents who had lived together for almost 18 years. I didn't want to lose any of them because I loved both of them equally. My mother threatened to divorce me. She shouted that she would not tolerate such treatment, and she also said that she would take me to her home. My father, as a lawyer, was well aware that the law would leave a minor son with his mother, so he did not want that. As I said, my father doted on me. He had nothing left, and he also threatened her that if she filed for a divorce, he would deprive her of all property, as well as her parental rights. He reminded me again where and by whom he worked. Then Dad suggested a compromise. Just forget about everything and leave it as it is. But my mother was furious. She wasn't going to give up just like that, and she knew it wouldn't be easy. In general, a month had passed since the quarrel. It was the worst month of my life. There was such a tense atmosphere at home. My parents did not talk to each other, and each of them tried to buy my attention. Every day they took turns offering me things, toys, gadgets, just money, and then it even came to foreign trips. Of course, it was all cool at first. I was happy. And then I was disgusted. They behaved like children. I freaked out and told them to immediately stop competing for the role of generous parent. Then there was silence. They stopped talking, even to me, but not for long. And then one morning I woke up and found that my mother was gone. She left a note on my desk saying that she felt unwanted and betrayed, and by me too. She wrote that she hoped to see some understanding from her son, but this did not happen. So she was forced to leave home. I read all this, and I was overcome with panic. I had no idea what to do, how to get it back, where it was. Was everything all right? I confess that I wept bitterly. I felt my guilt and responsibility as a son. Why didn't I stand up for her? Why didn't you talk to your father? I immediately called her on her cell phone, and when I heard how bitterly she was crying, my heart sank. I asked her where she was, asked her to forgive me, and she cried bitterly, then finally said that she could not go back to the house of traitors and hung up. That same day, I waited for my father. He came in late, as usual, and was very surprised that I was still awake. He asked where my mother was and why I was sitting in the kitchen at this hour. I'd been thinking about what to say to him all day. In general, the dialogue was direct and hard. I told him that he was not acting like a man. You betrayed my mother, and then you bragged and threatened to get involved with her. Did you tell her that you would leave her with nothing and take me, her child, from her? Dad, aren't you ashamed? You know, I've always admired you. You were a judge. You protect the victims. You make fair decisions. And at the same time, realizing that you are wrong, you mock your wife like this? How do you look into my eyes after that, Dad? I asked him a question. I knew my father couldn't say anything against it because he knew I was right. Then I took a deep breath and asked him to go away and leave us alone. His eyes widened. My father began to say something quickly, as if to justify himself. He asked me not to say such words. I knew that this was my trump card. Dad only listened to me implicitly. He loved me so much. I was firm in my decision, so Dad just packed up the next day and left as I asked. He promised not to disturb us again and said that he hoped I would forgive him. After he left, the house was empty. No mom or dad. I didn't feel any more alone. That's how I went from a teenager to an adult. I decided the fate of my family. Then I immediately called my mother and told her everything as it is. She was crying again and arrived in the evening. She hugged me and thanked me for standing up for her. I couldn't help it. That's about how we became a single-parent family. My father didn't show up as I asked. I didn't even write to him because my mother wanted me to. We started a new life. It was hard, but we got used to it. And one night, I heard my mother talking on the phone. I guessed it was Aunt Gray, a friend of hers from Denmark. My mother said that she punished this scumbag, my father, with the hands of her own son. I knew his weak spot. It was enough to just cry to Kira on the phone. He is a boy with a big heart, my mother said. I couldn't believe I was being taken advantage of. And my own mother. What have I done? I've ruined everything. The first thing I wanted to do was call my father and tell him everything. I felt bad for myself. I understood that my father was still to blame. After all, it was all because of his infidelity. But my mother was very cruel to me. Then I thought that if my dad found out about her plan, he would destroy it, and I would feel guilty again. I wanted to find him and communicate, at least in secret, but it turns out that he almost immediately left for another country. I don't know where. I've been looking for him ever since. From that moment on, I realized that it was better not to interfere in the affairs of my elders. They must solve their own problems. How sorry I am that our friendly family has broken up like this.
Hi, I'm Liz. Once in social networks, one adult man wrote me. At the time, I didn't have a lot of friends and decided to talk to him. Of course, there were thoughts, maybe this is some kind of maniac or pervert? But it wasn't what I thought, and I want to tell you this story. As long as I remember myself, my mother and I have lived alone. I never even asked where my father was or who he was. No, I did ask once, and regret about it. "Your father died a long time ago. Don't ask why or how," said Mother. I can't say that it hurt me to hear about it, because he was a stranger to me. However, pain stays at heart. Deep inside, there was a hope that he was alive and that one day I would meet him. I grew up a difficult teenager. My mother worked as a waitress in a local bar, and on weekends she worked as a cleaner in a business center. I really appreciated her work and effort. I clearly understood that she worked 2 jobs for me to give at least some education. Yes, I went to city school. My academic performance was not perfect except literature. I liked to read and write. Secretly to my mother, I attended poetry nights at that bar where she worked, but it was on weekends. And I was also a good mask myself, acting as an anonymous person. I admit that the audience loved my work. I didn't have any friends in high school. It must have been weird for people around me to hang out with a girl like me. I listened to rock, wore black, and preferred to eat alone. Mrs. Maurice, our school principal, often called my mother to school because of my bad behavior. "Just hit Kevin. He was looking at me, and I hate being stared at. He's fat and probably didn't feel nothing," I mumbled again. My mother apologized to the director, promising that this would not happen again. Then she grabbed my arm and led me away from the school. It was easy to spot my other anger. After we got in the car, she took out a cigarette and lit it without saying a word. Her style. She doesn't make a scene behind the wheel for safety reasons, but as soon as we step inside the house, she started. "I do everything for you, but you! Will there be a day when you don't get into something?" I stood with my head down. "You're just like your father!" she shouted out, and then held her breath. She was afraid of her own voice, and all because it was the first time she had used the memory about him to reproach me. I was hurt by the fact that I had no way of knowing even his name. After closing myself in my room, I opened my laptop and got a message on MySpace. Someone with Nick JJ sent a friend request. I hesitated. I did not like new friendships, but that night I wanted to do something unusual for myself. So the conversation starts. It turned out that JJ also likes art. He is a musician who writes lyrics and music himself. We immediately found a common language. I saw his concerts, and I didn't mind that he was older than me. About a month later, we couldn't live a day without writing. With each conversation, I got more used to it. No, we didn't see each other, but we understood each other so well. I could share the most intimate things with him. He always listened, advised. I sent him my sketches of my works, and he sent me his tracks. We could spend hours arguing about something. It was cool. A month later, I asked him to meet me, invited him to my poetry night. JJ didn't look like he is the one who is shy, but he didn't give me a specific answer to my offer of a meeting. I was a little upset and took it personally, but then he wrote that he would definitely come. I woke up early that day, and I spent the whole day choosing the right look in my wardrobe. My mother comes into the room. I could see from her face that I did something bad again. "What is it this time?" "Are you communicating with someone online? Inviting him to meet you at a bar for poetry night that I didn't even know about? How do you know he's not a maniac?" She was mad. Of course, I was angry. She was reading my personal messages. We had a conflict. "You're talking with the wrong person! Hey!" she called after me. I got dressed, picked up my laptop, and went to the cafe. The mood was bad, but I was looking forward to a pleasant, long-awaited meeting. Jay came in after my performance. He also looked concerned. I went to him. It didn't turn out the way I thought. "You're doing great," he said, then hugged me. I didn't understand why he was acting so strange. Then my mother appeared in the doorway. I lashed out at her, yelling at her to stay out of my life. But my mother said she wouldn't let him ruin my life. "To whom?" "He's your father," she said and pointed at Jay. "What the hell?" "He's dead," I thought. "So I've been talking to my own father all this time? Did he know and keep quiet?" I felt betrayed. These two have drawn me into their relationship. How unfair. A week has passed. I still haven't spoken to him or her. My mother was apologizing, saying she didn't want to involve me. Jay, my father, never wrote to me again. I must admit I missed communicating with him because no one understood me so well. When he found out I was pregnant, Jay was afraid of it. He was a musician and didn't want to problem himself with responsibilities. My mother suddenly began the conversation sitting at dinner. She told me about her life before me. Suddenly I saw her in another way. Strong. My mother became a model for me. I apologized for our misunderstanding. A few days later, I texted JJ saying I wasn't mad at him, even though I was communicating with a person who pretended to be somebody else. It was great for me to communicate with someone like that. It changed something inside me. He only wrote, "I'm sorry for everything." And then life returned to its normal course. I stopped wearing black, and I think now I have friends.